come to this country in 1849.
Part 2 of this video series ended with the death of George Barker Sr.'s youngest son, John, in 1849 in Kentucky, bringing the second generation to an end. His older brother, Hezekiah, had died in North Carolina in 1816, and George Jr. in Indiana, probably before 1846. George Sr. had died in 1806, but their mother's death date and location is uncertain. Since the number of known descendants of the three Barker brothers is large, Part 3 of this video series will focus on one of John Barker's children and his descendants. To do that, we must back up in time a bit. John and Jane had 8 children, beginning with Violet in 1796, followed by Williamson and John Jr., all born in North Carolina, and Priscilla, Morgan, Elizabeth, William, and Prudence, born after the family had moved to Virginia in about 1801. William was born January 14, 1809, an exceptional year for notable births. 1 week later, the great American writer and poet Edgar Allan Poe would be born. 1 month later, 2 of the world's most influential people of the 19th century, or perhaps any century, would be born on February 12th. Abraham Lincoln in Hodgenville, Kentucky, a little more than 100 miles west of where William was born, and Charles Darwin, born in England. One would change the course of history, and the other, our understanding of it. William was about 12 years old when the entire family migrated from Scott County, Virginia to Morgan County, Kentucky in about 1821 or 22. 9 months after his mother Jane died in 1830, William married Elizabeth Mumbauer, whose family had migrated from the same region of Virginia as the Barkers. They had their first child, Henry Manitou Barker, in 1832. They would eventually have 10 more over the next 20 years. William and Betty moved to the vicinity of Crockett, only about 10 miles from where William grew up at Malone, but the exact location cannot be determined. We do know that George Fannin, who married Betty's sister Mary Mumbauer, were neighbors and had purchased land the same summer as William and Betty, and probably had a common border along a stream branch now bearing his name, Fannin's Fork. We don't have known photos of William or Betty, but George, shown here with Mary, can be seen as a witness on William's deed. William is found in the 1850 census, the first one to list everyone's names, making individuals much easier to trace, especially females. In 1852, William and Betty's next to last child, Morgan, not shown here, drowned at 1 year of age. Harriet Beecher Stowe published the anti-slavery novel Uncle Tom's Cabin, which became the best-selling book outside the Bible in the 19th century. At the same time, the great California gold rush of 1849 had reached its peak. Well more than 100,000 had flooded California, only about half of them Americans. Others included Mexicans, Chinese, Europeans, and Australians. In March 1857, one of the most controversial rulings in U.S. Supreme Court history, the Dred Scott decision, said that blacks were not U.S. citizens, and slaveholders had the right to take existing slaves into free areas of the country, causing the anti-slavery movement to pick up steam. That year, William and Betty's oldest child, 26-year-old Henry Manitou Barker, married Angeline Jevin, the 18-year-old descendant of a family of French Protestant refugees called Huguenots, who came to America in the early 1700s. The Barker and Jevin clans would become close through marriages, war, friendships, and tragedy. Henry and Angeline bought their own homestead on Halsey Branch of Grassy Creek, about 6 miles southwest of where his grandparents John and Jane had first settled at Malone. Some of Angeline's family were already living there. Their first child, John C. Barker, probably after his uncle John Calhoun, was born in early 1858. In August, the first of several Lincoln-Douglas debates were staged leading up to the 1860 election. The following year, their second child, Mary Ann, was born. Abolitionist John Brown tried to instigate a slave revolt by seizing the U.S. arsenal at Harper's Ferry, Virginia, but was thwarted by U.S. Marines led by Colonel Robert E. Lee. John Brown and 2 black members of his band were hanged. The South felt vindicated. Many in the North were enraged. Meanwhile, a then 50-year-old Charles Darwin published the most important science book since Newton's Principia, The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. In the summer of 1860, Henry's 23-year-old brother Peter was killed by a rolling log while cutting wood, the second of his brothers to die prematurely. Henry and Angeline would experience much more tragedy in the coming years. In October 1860, their third child, Sarah Elizabeth, was born. The following month, Abraham Lincoln was elected president without even being on the ballot in the Deep South. The new Republican Party's platform, for which Lincoln was the standard bearer, had been full of anti-slavery resolutions. In December, after the election results were known, South Carolina passed an ordinance of secession from the Union. It was followed in quick succession by Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Virginia wavered, but followed suit in April. Events began to accelerate as Jefferson Davis had been elected president of the Confederacy in February 1861, even before Lincoln was inaugurated. After Lincoln was sworn in March, he sent federal troops to Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. The small garrison there was fired upon in early April. The Civil War had officially begun. In July, the North was shocked by Confederates at the Battle of Bull Run, also known as the First Manassas, only 30 miles outside Washington, D.C. The inexperienced troops on both sides fought until the Union troops fell back in disarray towards Washington. Civilian onlookers, hoping for a good show, fled in panic. An unknown Confederate general named Thomas J. Jackson would earn the name Stonewall for standing his ground. The first major battle of the Civil War went to the South. Despite slavery in Kentucky, along with Delaware, Maryland, and Missouri, it was kept in the Union by the legislature in Frankfort, a strong presence of the military, and the authorization of home guards to suppress any secession activities or sympathizers. Federal marshals began arresting those suspected of treason. Abraham Lincoln reportedly said, "I hope to have God on my side, but I must have Kentucky." In September, a prominent slave owner and pro-secessionist, Jack May, began organizing a company of what was intended as a pro-secession Morgan County Guard at his father's home in Prestonburg, but it quickly swelled to over 1,000 men. Among them were other prominent Kentucky names, including Clay, Breckinridge, Swango, Shawhan, Desha, and Preston. It also included several Barkers, their neighbors, and in-laws, the Jevedons. The Barker patriarch, William, who was 52 at the time, and 4 of his sons joined Jack May's unit. Henry Manitou, age 29, John Calhoun, age 27, George W., age 21, and William Likens, age 17. In addition, Henry and William's brothers-in-law, William Leach, age 22, Willis Green, age 20, and Joseph T. Jevedon, age 16, joined too. Although the war was clearly precipitated by slavery, it is unclear why our ancestors joined the Confederacy. Like the vast majority of volunteers, they had no slaves. Historians have and will continue to debate motivations, and we will not settle that issue here. They may have been pro-slavery, or in sympathy with their relatives in Virginia, or upset with the meddling of the federal government, or just looking for an adventure away from the drudgery of the farm since everyone thought the other side would back down and the war would be over in a few weeks. Or all of the above. We just don't know, since there are no known surviving letters or other documents that would give us a clue. No attempt to justify, glorify, romanticize, or denigrate their participation will be made here. Their story will simply be told based on the facts that are known. All of these men were officially sworn in at the county seat of West Liberty, Kentucky, on October 21, 1861, under Jack May as part of Company A, 5th Kentucky Mounted Infantry Regiment of the Confederate Army. It was a one-year enlistment, but most would get their fill of war and some would not survive it. That we will explore in part 4 of this video series.